All right, hello everyone. Happy Sunday. It's nice to see everyone visiting. I hate to interrupt. Yeah, I love drip coffee, by the way.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Kids love it.
Yeah.
Tried to get it for them, so good.
Which location do you go to?
Lover's Lane is away. It's only Lover's Lane is away.
Oh, okay. I usually go to the one in Oak Lawn. It's on Oak Lawn, up by there's Kroger up there. No, it's a Tom Thumb. I'm sorry. Like just south of Park Cities Press. Yeah, very nice location. All right, hey everyone. Good morning, and another hot day here. Jeez. I used to say I'd rather be hot than cold, but I don't know. Yeah, not you? Yeah. Well, after completely abandoning our lesson last week, thanks for that wonderful discussion. And I'm not going to belabor that today, but there was a follow-up that I wrote about on Friday. If you haven't seen that, I'd be glad to send it to you, about my experience this week with something that happened as a result of that. I just don't want to go down that whole road again today, but it's been quite an amazing week all the way around. A lot of emails, contacts, phone calls, and things happening. Pardon? Well, I just don't want to. I don't want to take over another class with this. So,
We're planning on being here next week. So
Caroline says we're planning on being here next week anyway. That's the best answer ever, Caroline. I'll give you the brief version.
All right, thank you.
I wrote about this in the Friday Roundup. Some of you all have read this. I'll make it brief. So I have a young friend who I know has been struggling with mental health issues, and last fall realized he was suicidal and committed himself to an inpatient facility to get better. I had sent him on Sunday evening the link to this article I wrote that was the one I read to y'all last Sunday when I published it. Monday, I went to physical therapy down on Oak Lawn in Lemon. And after physical therapy, I went over to eat an early lunch at the Panera Bread Company right there on Lemon. And I'm sitting in a booth, and my friend calls me, and he says, "Are you alone?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I'm in Panera, but I'm sitting in a booth by myself." And he begins to tell me, he said, "I've made a horrible mistake. I went and I bought a gun with the express purpose of killing myself. And now I don't want to do it, and I don't know what to do with the gun." There are other factors in this that I won't go into for his privacy. And we talked through several options. I offered a little help. He was consulting some other folks who were mentors and friends. Felt like he was in a better place, hung up the phone. Do you hang up a cell phone? You don't really hang up a cell phone. You end the call, whatever. Yeah. Y'all are all old enough to know what it means to hang up the phone, right? So,
you can't do that anymore. It's just thinking about that.
yeah, I know. You can't slam the phone down. We ended the call. I'm sitting there with my lunch half eaten in front of me, my laptop, and I just started crying. I just could not stop crying. I mean, weeping. And I'm grabbing for napkins to try to wipe my tears away. And it's one of those things where I didn't care. I was so overcome with emotion. And the next thing I know, there is a woman standing next to me with her arm around my shoulder. And she said two words, only two words, over and over and over again to me. She said, "Be comforted. Be comforted. Be comforted." And I explained to her why I was crying, and she said, "Be comforted." That's all she said. Only those two words over and over again. So she, pardon me. Dang, I hate this. I'm off my allergy meds because I'm having skin testing done on Tuesday. No, it's not going to help. Thanks. Having skin testing done on Tuesday, and you have to be off your antihistamines for a week, and it's killing me. As you can see. All right. I had seen this woman come in. She's probably late 30s, early 40s. Beautifully dressed, elegant woman. And she has either her older sister or her mother with her, who's a quadriplegic. In one of those fancy chairs, you know, scooters, chairs. And I've seen her. She's over there feeding, let's call it her mother. I assume it's her mother. Could have been an older sister. She's feeding her. They've obviously gone out to lunch. And she's feeding her because her loved one cannot feed herself. And when she saw me in distress, she left her duty with her family member, got up from her table, came over to comfort me. Now, here's the other part of this story I didn't write about. I'm obviously an old white man. She's a young black woman. And I think in our context that matters, right? So what I mean, I swear this woman was an angel, right? When I finally got myself together and finished my lunch and was ready to go to my next place, I walked over to thank her again at the table. And all she said to me was, not be comforted. She had more words this time. She said, nobody should cry alone. And I left. And that was it. It's a remarkable, this is my weird life, y'all. I just meet the strangest, most wonderful people you just never expect to meet. And what an encouragement that was. What an absolute encouragement that was. And what I wrote about in the Friday Roundup is, you know, any of us could be that person. Any of us could be that encourager, right? If we're just sensitive and we're willing to look at what's going on around us, right? So first of all, this woman has to be a believer. Her words were too precise. And the risk she took to come talk to me and to be a comforting presence to me in a Panera. You know, this was not in a chapel. This was just out there, right? And my friend is okay, by the way. He figured out what to do with the gun. It's gone, and he's more stable right now, right? So this is the way. But the messages, the emails, the text messages, the Facebook message. I had a message Sunday evening from Bart Barber, who's the immediate past president of the Southern Baptist Convention, telling me how helpful he thought that column was. I had a text message from O.S. Hawkins, who some of y'all know, used to be pastor of First Baptist Dallas, president of Guidestone, now chancellor at Southwestern Seminary, thanking me for it. From CBF pastors, I heard from so many chaplains and counselors, so many chaplains, because this is the world they live in as well. So with that's this week's story, right? Let's move back to our biblical text that we were on, 3 weeks ago? I guess it was 3 weeks ago. About God's preference for the poor. And just to remind you of where we were in this, there is a theme in the Bible that God has a preference to lift up the poor. You will never find in the Bible God being concerned about a rich person not having enough riches. It's not there. And the way the biblical text goes, it is always the oppressed, the marginalized, those without, who Jesus and God throughout the Bible are seeking to lift up and rescue. This is just from Genesis to Revelation. It's in there. And this is a message that doesn't play well in North Dallas. Y'all, I mean, yes, Jim?
You say he's not concerned about the rich not having it.
Right.
But a little bit, because remember he said about the one who he gave the money to, the three different servants.
Yeah, the parable is
And one of them,
of the talents. Well, yeah.
He did it. He says,
Yeah, the parable of the talents, you should invest it well.
so the one who was blessed the most was the one who invested well, and the one who
You got me on that one.
ground.
Yeah, you got me on that one.
It was because he didn't use his talent.
He didn't use his talent. Yes, that's right. Marilyn.
Yesterday, I was reading something on, I don't know where it was on my iPad, but it was about that they were going to, I think based in California, that they were going to get rid of all the homeless people, and they were just gonna, I don't know who it was, if it was the mayor or what, he said, I'm ready for the bulldozer.
Okay, so the question is about homeless people in California, and there's a whole can of worms, but it does illustrate the problem. So let's go down this rabbit hole for just a moment, because there probably is no more vexing illustration of poverty in America than homelessness. And we've all been a part of this somehow, right? And Wilshire's mission projects are deeply involved in this as well. It is difficult. And the things we know that work, we are not willing to do. The things that are cheaper than the way we're doing it, we are not willing to do. Now, California is especially problematic. Within the past year, I've been to both Los Angeles and San Francisco, which are epicenters. I mean, if you think there are homeless people in Dallas, you need to go to LA and San Francisco because it's a more temperate, well, LA is a more temperate climate. And a lot of people go there, right? Excuse me, God. A lot of people go there because they can live on the streets more temperately, right? And so people end up in Los Angeles from all over, not just from there. It is a popular destination to be homeless, if you can get there. And so the homeless people are everywhere. And then, of course, in LA, the biggest problem is a place called Skid Row. And this has been a problem for years. We actually had our Wilshire Youth Choir there several years ago, singing at the Union Rescue Mission on Skid Row in Los Angeles. And I was a sponsor that year, and I took small groups of kids out on little tours of Skid Row because our Wilshire kids had never seen anything like this in their lives. They were absolutely overwhelmed by it, right? And we stood at an intersection where you could see the skyscrapers of downtown Los Angeles, this direction, and look all around you, and you got people asleep on the streets for blocks and blocks and blocks. Drug use, mental illness, all these things wrapped up in there, all the bad stuff everywhere around you. Not a great place to be. It was a great education. Great education for our kids, and your grandson was in this group.
My mind was with you.
Yeah. That's the same trip where, they went swimming in different backyards.
I went there too.
Same trip. Yeah, that was very clever. Every time I go to Pasadena, I think of them. Yeah, that one's another story. For those who just came in, I'm off my antihistamines because of a skin test on Tuesday, which is why I'm coughing. I do not have COVID. I do not have emphysema. I just have a river of mucus running down my throat. It's horrible. Absolutely horrible. So what do you do about this? So California has had mayors of Los Angeles, governors of California, who have alternated between let's help these people, let's kick these people out. It just yo-yos over time, back and forth between the two extremes. And nothing has worked so far. Nothing. And it's gotten worse, as a matter of fact. So the question is, what do you do? And so not out of California, but out of Oregon, there was a Supreme Court case that was settled 2 weeks ago. A case that made it all the way up to the Supreme Court. The question of it was, can a city, Grants Pass, Oregon, fine people for sleeping on the street or in a park? Or can they arrest them simply for sleeping outdoors? Because Grants Pass, Oregon adopted an anti-camping, a no camping policy. So it's considered camping. So you cannot, anyhow, it's complicated, right? And ultimately, it made up the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that yes, a municipality can set its own laws and can fine people for being homeless, essentially. Because they don't know what else to do. Marilyn.
Well, as I read that.
Yes.
I read that about the Supreme Court. But I was thinking the whole time, I said, well, let them get arrested. At least they'll have a bed. They'll
Right.
get food. They'll,
But then they'll just cycle through again.
yeah.
Yes, Ann?
To me, part of it always gets down to, we have more crazy people in this country than we have ever had. And you've got such a large segment of the homeless that they're just happy as pigs in the sunshine, living homeless.
So, statistically,
What do you do about that?
if you trace the origins of the modern homeless problem in America, it goes back to the deinstitutionalization, that's a big word, of mental illness, right? Which I am not saying that was grand, right? But you had this movement to no longer institutionalize people who couldn't take care of themselves. And then on top of that, you have a major drug epidemic. Margie?
Well, they're not addressing the issue, they're just punishing these people.
Well, that's right. So here's the problem with this, and this goes to our lesson today. It is easier, but more expensive, by the way, to punish people for being homeless than to help them not be homeless. So one of the things we know works, and City Square has been, at the forefront of this here in Dallas, affordable housing. People, not all, but a lot of people become homeless because they can't afford a place to live.
And City Square just went under, right?
Well, so that's a whole other complicated thing. City Square is closing. They're sort of liquidating because they didn't have enough financial resources.
We talked about that.
Okay, so they are siphoning off their things to other people. And so some of this is going to continue. But that also illustrates the problem. City Square is doing all this work, and they cannot raise enough money in Dallas, Texas, to keep doing it. And I'm trying not to use dirty words here, how many gazillionaires live in Dallas? This is a wealthy city.
68,000 millionaires.
58,000.
68.
68,000.
In Dallas. I read that.
Wow. And we can't provide for the homeless.
No, but we can help the universities and the museums and the orchestras.
Well, we can certainly help the football teams. More than that, we can build stadiums and all that.
There are a few homeless shelters down by the bridge that do have rich people.
There are. There are, and they are not enough.
Yeah.
And what is really needed is sustainable, affordable housing. Carol Ann.
You said just now that it's costing them more to
Yes.
find them. What happens is they'll give them a fine for sleeping in the park or wherever, and then they can't pay it. And so they put out a warrant for their arrest.
That's right.
And they put them in prison or jail, and the jails are overcrowded.
And it costs more to keep someone in prison than to keep them out.
It's about $100 a day.
Rob says it's $100 a day to keep someone in prison. I mean, that's expensive, y'all. And
All over the world, though, I heard a segment on a news program the other day. Venice, London, Paris, everywhere that's a big tourist destination in the summer, they are just saying, I mean, I think Sicily just closed the doors and said, no more tourists. We're
Right.
overloaded. There are so many people in the world today. It's going to cause problems that we've never had before.
right, the growing population. So this is this complicated issue, but the data are pretty clear that if you try to prevent homelessness, it is more effective and cheaper than trying to address homelessness after it happens. But this is a political position that cannot get through any place because it's back to Ronald Reagan and welfare queens, right? It is a perception in people's mind that is not necessarily a realistic truth. So when we come to our passages like we're looking at 3 weeks ago and then picking up again today, Jesus, and throughout the Bible, we're getting these messages to care for the poor, right? And there are provisions for this. It is a very different world today. I mean, even if I think back when I was a kid and when you were kids, yes, there were homeless people. We called them hobos back in the day, right? But it was a fraction of what we have today. Again, several factors to that. You're right, population growth is one part of it. Urban growth is another part of it. The drug problem is a huge part of it. PTSD with veterans is a huge part of it. And all of these things, and bad policy, the deinstitutionalizing of mental illness.
Was huge. I remember when that happened.
Right, and that set all this off.
Immediately, the streets were full of all these people.
Yep.
So again, but we've not been willing to work toward a better solution. Everyone wants to say, well, we got all these homeless people. So when Jesus says, the poor you'll always have with you, right? But the other thing I need to say right here is homeless people are not the only poor people among us.
No.
I mean, not even by a long shot. So if you look at the statistics, if you look at the history, look at the cost of rent in this city, which is astronomical, right? But it's not unlike other places. What it takes to earn, to be able to live in a basic, safe place here is far more than it used to be. And that's not just due to inflation, right? So all of these things add up. I mean, this is why Dallas ISD has a special program for homeless students. They've had to address that because kids can't learn if they don't know where to live.
Well, it used to be you couldn't sign up for school if you didn't have an address.
But that would leave a lot of kids out now. Yeah. Maybe they have a post office box or, a relative's house or something, right? So not just homelessness, but we have the working poor among us, right? The working poor everywhere among us, and they are largely unseen.
And undocumented.
A lot undocumented. Look at any restaurant you go to, look in the kitchen. Don't look at the servers. Look in the kitchen. And you will find the people we're talking about who are making your food, largely. Right? Jim?
The lady at Kroger who was working there full time and she was homeless. She got kicked out of her apartment. She couldn't afford to pay rent anymore. They weren't paying her enough, but she was working full time.
Yeah.
And she was on the streets at that point and going to different people's homes and, can you put me up? Yeah. And yet she was working full time.
Right.
Big question though. So we're talking about we want to take care of them and we need to, give to it. But and I'm not saying this is right or whatever, but when, when was it Mary, wasn't she the one who washed?
Oh, yeah,
his feet
yeah.
With
The expensive ointment.
And they criticized her for
Right.
it and said you could have given that to the poor.
You could have given it to the poor.
So, and yet Jesus said, no, it's okay. So, in that case, it almost seems like they're saying, no, it's okay, you don't need to give to the poor. You can give to the church all this money.
Yeah, I don't think that's what.
I'm just wondering.
Yeah,
how do we
what Jesus is saying is there are enough resources to do both. That you can worship me, which the contemporary you can build your churches. We have all these fancy church buildings in Dallas, right? And take care of the poor at the same time. It is not an exclusionary thing because there are enough resources. There are ways to do this. But it's, again, we do not have the political will, nor do we have the theological will, the church will, to address this problem. Because the church says, well, the government ought to take care of this. The government says, well, the church ought to take care of this. And nobody takes care of it.
The truth is, they both ought to be doing it.
And it takes, I mean, if we're going to live in a society that values people, we need to take care of people, right? So Texas, now you've pulled my chain. Texas is one of 10 states that has refused, not just declined, but refused to participate in Medicaid expansion. And what this means, Carol Ann can tell us, is people who, there is federal money available to expand the number of people who receive Medicaid to be able to access health care, but our governor thinks that's giving in to the liberals if he takes that money. And the people who suffer in that are the poor people. Carol Ann?
We are so blessed. I didn't think we were gonna get Medicaid for Neil because they said I made too much. And, there is no way we could have made it without Medicaid. They want like $12,000 a month for your part
Right.
of that. I mean, and who has 12,000? Well, a lot of people.
Well, no. Who has $12,000 a month? Yeah. Most people do not. Yeah, most middle-class people do not, right?
We are blessed.
But it's not, so I have a friend who lives in South Carolina. His wife is an interior decorator. She's had breast cancer recently. She was out of work for a while. They've got 5 kids. They qualified for Medicaid, especially during the pandemic. And the Attorney General of South Carolina went after them for Medicaid fraud because she was treated for breast cancer. And it took hiring a lawyer with money they do not have to fight the state attorney general who was out trying to look good on a campaign trail that he's fighting Medicaid fraud. So he's going after a family where the primary breadwinner is a woman who had breast cancer. Well, we got the wrong message here, folks, right? Let's get back to the text. All right. We were in the Psalms, I think, when we left off here. Let me get back to that.
And you know what? I've changed books. I can't even tell you.
Okay. Let's look at Psalm 14:6. This is the heading on my Bible in this chapter is Denunciation of Godlessness. That's good. It's the chapter that begins, the psalm begins, fools say in their hearts there is no God. They're corrupt. They do, I started to say, abdominal deeds. They do abominable deeds. I mean, Richard Simmons did just die. Okay. The Lord looks down from heaven on humankind to see if there are any who are wise, who seek after God. They've all gone astray. They're all alike perverse. There is no one who does good, no, not one. Have they no knowledge, all the evildoers who eat up my people as they eat bread and do not call upon the Lord? There they shall be in great terror, for God is with the company of the righteous. You would confound the plans of the poor, but the Lord is their refuge. Oh, that deliverance for Israel would come from Zion. When the Lord restores the fortunes of his people, Jacob will rejoice and Israel will be glad. You rich people, you people who are not doing what the Lord has said, you confound the plans of the poor. All right, let's move on. Well, there we go. Okay, so, sorry about that, y'all. Okay, we're gonna have to move to the other one next time. Okay, hang on. Here's my. Okay, I think we're good right now, unless it pops up again. All right, sorry about that, y'all. Went flying with that. Psalm 22:26. This is in the context of a psalm for deliverance. The poor shall eat and be satisfied. Those who seek him shall praise the Lord. May your hearts live forever.
Say that verse again.
Psalm 22:26.
Thank you.
Psalm 37:14. The wicked draw the sword and bend their bows to bring down the poor and needy, to kill those who walk uprightly. Their swords shall enter their own heart, and their bows shall be broken.
What's he talking about? I mean,
So what he's talking about here, now again, ancient context, right? So you have a kingdom, not a democracy. You have a kingdom, and yet David, writing this psalm, allegedly, maybe, is saying that those who seek to bring down the poor will end up with the arrows in their own hearts instead. Right?
That's kind of like karma is gonna get you. You know?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, karma's going to get you, yeah.
It seems, if you back up, it seems to say in this psalm how he's lamenting and what a worm he is and how despicable things are and people are just dealing on him constantly. And he goes on, he's scorned by others, despised by people, those who mock at me. Then he goes, commit your ways to the Lord. And goes on about, about taking care of and how those who are, that's what it's
Right.
And how he's been in a despised and a horrible, God, where are you?
Right.
Kind of mood, and this is where this is coming from. Further down.
So it's all in this context, yes. So I think this is an important point. The biblical command to care for the poor does not just happen in isolation. It's a part of the whole package of what we're taught. So look at Psalm 72. Psalm 72. Give the king your justice, O God, and your righteousness to a king's son. May he judge your people with righteousness and your poor with justice. May the mountains yield prosperity for the people and the hills in righteousness. May he defend the cause of the poor people, give deliverance to the needy, and crush the oppressor. Move over to verse 12 in the same chapter, speaking of the Lord. For he delivers the needy when they call, the poor and those who have no helper. The poor and those who have no helper. And so one of the biblical concepts about the poor is not just about money. It's about those who are marginalized in a way that they have no influence, no power. They have no protector in this case. Those are lumped in with the poor as well. Again, we can go on and on through the Psalms. Let's move out of the Psalms and look at something else. Okay, we're not going to do that one. Ecclesiastes 9:16. I've also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, And it seemed great to me. I started in verse 13, sorry. And it seemed great to me. There was a little city with a few people in it. A great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. Now there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man. So I said, wisdom is better than might, yet the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heeded. So to get a context on this, think about low-level employees in a company who maybe are the ones who keep that company running and come up with the innovations that are needed to adapt on the front line. They're not getting rewarded. They're not even given a banquet, right?
They don't get the bonus.
And they sure don't get the big bonus. You know, it's someone else up line in that. Isaiah, the Old Testament's full of this stuff. The Lord enters, this is Isaiah chapter 3. The Lord enters into judgment with the elders and princes of his people. It is you who have devoured the vineyard. The spoil of the poor is in your houses. The spoil of the poor is in your houses. What do you mean by crushing my people, by grinding the face of the poor, says the Lord God of hosts? Who made that cheap shirt you bought? Mm-hmm. Okay. So much here. Let's try to move to a different chapter, a different book here. Amos, another great prophet, chapter 2, verse 7. Thus says the Lord, begin verse 6. For 3 transgressions of Israel and for 4, I will not remove the punishment, because they sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They who trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth and push the afflicted out of the way, father and son go in the same girl, so that my holy name is profaned. All right, so you see what's happening here? They're comparing sexual immorality with trampling on the poor. They're equally bad in Amos here. All right, let's move on. Oh, Zechariah. We don't read out of Zechariah enough. The word of the Lord came to Zechariah, saying, Thus says the Lord of hosts, render true judgments, show kindness and mercy to one another. Do not oppress the widow, the orphan, the alien, or the poor, and do not devise evil in your hearts against one another. But they refused to listen and turned a stubborn shoulder and stopped their ears in order not to hear. They made their hearts adamant in order not to hear the law and the words that the Lord of hosts had sent by his Spirit through the former prophets. Therefore, great wrath came from the Lord of hosts, etc. We hear a lot of preaching about the wrath of God coming on you for other sins, but when's the last time you heard a sermon about the wrath of God coming on you for not caring for the poor? Yet that's what the Old Testament prophets are preaching over and over. Let's get into the New Testament here. Of course, in the Beatitudes, Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit. That's a different thing, right?
That's poor in spirit, though.
I said that's a different thing. Yeah. Then we have, when John the Baptist sends a message to ask Jesus if he's the one. When John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word to his disciples and said to him, are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another? Jesus answered them, go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me. So the very foundational mission that Jesus identifies for himself is bringing good news to the poor. This was also true in the declaration when he read the scroll in the temple, that day. What is it that Jesus advises Nicodemus, the rich young ruler, if he wants to follow Jesus, go sell everything you have and give it to the poor. And then come and follow me. And then,
This was the rich young ruler.
I'm sorry, the rich young ruler. The rich young ruler. I said Nicodemus. Wait, who is it?
Not Nicodemus, but it's the rich.
The rich young ruler. I got my Bible stories mixed up.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're just confusing me.
Yeah.
Because Nicodemus was old.
Yeah, sorry, this is the rich young ruler. Right, you know that. Now, one of the most famous lines that we quote, I already quoted earlier today, where Jesus says, the poor you will always have with you. Right? Well, that doesn't mean we don't have to care for them. Right? It's simply a statement that this is the nature of the human condition, that we will always have poor people with us. But as we already noted, even in our lifetimes, we've seen this shift with so many more people in poverty than used to be, right? And part of this is just simply, I mean, some of y'all, my mother grew up in abject poverty on a cotton farm in southern Oklahoma. And some of y'all have family who've come from that same, right? But they always had something, and there was community to help them as well. What happens today is we are so dislocated that a lot of poor people have no one to help them, right? Yes, Dwayne?
I used to say that I'm glad that the federal government did not discover poverty until I was grown, because I might have had a real complex. Some things made me revise my whole feelings about this. One of which was Heather Mustang's statement on the church bulletin one time, where he said about her growing up poor.
Yeah.
He said we were poor, but we didn't know we were poor because everybody was in the same boat.
Right.
There is that camaraderie of relationships.
Yes.
Whether you're talking about troops in combat and war,
Right.
or people struggling with paying their bills, in the country, in Louisiana, which is where I grew up. But then I realized my own feelings about poverty were pretty well changed when I read Wayne Oates' book, which had one chapter about his growing up in poverty. And I realized I did not grow up in poverty. We were poor, but number one, I never worried about something to eat. That was always there.
Yeah.
Second, we always had clothing, not the greatest of the world, but we had clothing, and mother kept it good and clean. And the third thing, most important, was the infused in me attitude: you don't have to live this way all your life. Get an education,
Right.
be responsible, and work hard, da-da-da-da-da.
And so, thank you. That's a beautiful story. And the thing I would add to that is, when you get an education and work hard and make something for yourself, remember where you came from. Right? Yes, Melanie.
Well, I think also back then, at least my parents' kind of situation was, rural poor was a little different than what you read about urban poor, at the same time. That kind of thing. Although, obviously, in the Delta, rural poor is
Right.
awful. But what I was thinking about was, hold on, rural poor, I just lost it.
Okay. Marilyn?
What do you do when someone obviously comes to you're in line in your car, and we have different places where
Right.
people walk through?
Oh, right. So this is one of the biggest presentations. What do you do when someone approaches you? And Heather has addressed this before, I think, really well. There's also research in Dallas that shows that not all, but a fair number of people who are panhandling don't really need to be out there panhandling. The people who really need your help are not on the street, right? And so that may help you a little. The true test is if you offer someone food and they don't want the food, they don't want the cash, right? And so one of the things that, we were taught several years ago that I don't do anymore, but I used to carry, bags of basic foods in the car, and if someone, you could just hand that out the window, right? Peanut butter crackers, fruit juice, whatever that you can. Yeah, Vienna sausage, the kind of things that are non-perishable that you just keep in a brown paper bag, and just hand that to someone. And if they want that, if they accept it, they're truly needy. If they reject it, okay, probably not, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is, in the big scheme of things, what we do to help politically and funding through the church and through individual contributions, the kind of stuff that goes on at Cornerstone, for example, that Bob and Charlene have been involved in for years and years and years.
And this Wednesday, you can come, isn't it this Wednesday?
Yes.
That you can come hear Chris Simmons.
Chris Simmons is going to be here this Wednesday talking about, they have a tremendous feeding program. And it takes people like us who have resources to support that, right? Do you remember what you're going to say?
When you were talking about working hard and moving forward, also a lot of people, certainly my father's age, were able to do that on the GI Bill. And so that's the confluence of, the government helping,
Again, times have changed, right? So, for example, back to my own mother, who was the oldest of 4 children, grew up in poverty. She went to Midwestern State University in Wichita Falls, the first person in her family to go to college, and was able to pay her way through by working at the university. It is not possible to do that today. You can go to any state school in Texas, and you cannot find a job as a student that would put you through school.
No.
It is impossible to get a college education today without debt or family money. You cannot work your way through college anymore.
Well, you can take 15 years to do it.
Well, unless you take 15 years to do it, right? Yeah, it's true. So this is radically different, right? And yet we know still the statistics show that just a college education ups your earning potential for life by a significant factor, right? Just simply having a degree. This is the way it works, right? So, so much to say about this. Jim?
We keep reading all these verses.
Yeah.
We keep pulling them up. And all of them seem to say how we're supposed to take care of the poor.
Yes.
And that those who don't take care of the poor, they're cursed. They will be knocked down, all these
Right.
things. And you go, no, they're not being cursed.
You don't see them
They're
being
not
cursed.
knocked
Yeah.
down. Yet people who are maybe unfaithful to wives, maybe they are embezzling other sins or other things, they'll get thrown in jail, they'll
Right.
you see the repercussions of that. But if you don't take care of the poor, although he says in so many places they are cursed, they will be knocked down, they will lose things.
Yeah.
You just don't see that happening. So you
Not
don't
in
see
this
people,
way.
but you don't see these things happening.
Yeah, so Jim has raised a really interesting point. Let me just pick up on this.
So the church doesn't care. Poor people
Right.
don't care.
But it's not just this. There are so many things that the scriptures teach us that we are to do that we may not do, and we live against the moral code, not just on the things we like to highlight, right, which tend to be sexual things, right, but these other things about caring for people, being generous, for example. We don't see people being punished by God for this. And this is a real problem, right? It makes us wonder what's really up in the world. And I struggle with this too. The only answer I can come up with is there is a more cosmic thing afoot than we can see, right? And God's justice is not within our sight. I don't understand it. But you're right. You're absolutely right. Carol Ann?
I've been thinking a lot lately about the homeless and stuff, and we don't see anything happening. So, I mean, I sorry, Melody, I'm starting to lose my train of thought too, but nothing happens. And what are we to do?
This is the dilemma, and we can see this year after year, decade after decade. There's a lot of yak, and not much gets done about this, right? And if you look at wealth inequality in America today, the gap is beyond reason, right? The wealthier are getting wealthier, the wealthy are getting wealthier, and the poor are getting poorer. And it's harder and harder to be middle class in the economy that we have today. It's just not right, you know? But this is the way we've sort of let things run amok. I want to close by my favorite verse of scripture, one that has been a guiding force to me most of my adult life, and it's from 1 John chapter 3, verse 15 and 16. Behold, if anyone has the world's riches and sees his brother or sister in need and does not help them, how can the love of God be in them? How can the love of God be in us if we see people in need and don't help? And so, you know how most of us deal with that? We don't see people in need. We cover our eyes. It's like watching a scary TV show. Tell me when it's over, right? Because we don't know how to deal with it. And if I have to give any advice out of this, none of us individually can solve this problem. It is so enormous. But all of us together can do something. And I think a starting point is to find some even simple way that you can help someone, some simple way, right? It's even better if no one knows you're doing it, right? Then number two is to advocate for policies, both within our church missions budget and in our government. These things all work together, right? There's so many good people in the world who are doing things silently that you don't know. I'll go back to the woman at Panera, who's an example of an angel, right? During my time on staff here, one of the biggest blessings that I got year after year after year was being able to be the intermediary between people who have resources and people who do not have resources. People who wanted to make anonymous gifts of incredible magnitude to people. I can't talk about that without giving away confidential information. But I want you to know there are good people. There are good people who have resources and don't want any attention, but will go to great lengths to funnel money and support to people they know to be in need at a certain time. And that's heartwarming, it's rewarding, right, to know that. And you don't have to be a millionaire to do that. You don't have to be a millionaire to do that. All of us can help someone. I was having a conversation with a new friend this week, and I was telling him about Clifford, not the big red dog, my charge, Clifford. And this is a younger person who is not American by origin, comes from a different culture. And he said, why do you don't have to keep doing that. You don't have to do that. And I said, but I do. I could not live with myself if I didn't, right? Because what I say I believe, if I'm not putting that into practice with someone who's right in front of me, right? How can I just have to change who I am, right? But in his perspective, that, and this comes down to the difference of our faith. Because I feel like something as simple as that is a command that we're given. We need to live our lives in that way, to care for those who are put in our pathway, who have need. And who's in your pathway? You know, who is it, Caroline?
It doesn't have to be money.
It doesn't have to be money.
That was so beautiful about the lady at the
Right.
Sarah.
Yeah. If you have a generous heart, right? Ann?
Well, and I know a lot of people have problems with sharing their money with their kids when the kids are adults. But to me, if you can't help support members of your own family,
Yeah.
children, grandchildren, whatever, when they need it, what good are you? And what good is it to wait 20 years till you die and they can inherit it?
Well, now we can have a whole lesson on estate planning, and I've got some opinions on that. Again, part of the funeral business and part of walking with families through their grief over the years, and work here on the church staff as part of that, I will tell you this. I've never once had a child of a deceased member of this church, I've told you this before, who loved the church more than life itself. That child would come back and say, you know, my parents left $3 million. I think I could give $300,000 to help a mission fund at the church. Never, ever has that happened. Because kids get money inherited and they're going to spend it on themselves. They do not spend it on someone else. So if you intend to use your estate to help someone other than your kids, you've got to write it down. You've got to do it. It only can be done by you.
Question, you just threw out there that line, if you give 10% and give it.
Yeah, I didn't say if you give 10%.
Or,
No,
well,
we're out of time.
yeah,
I got to stop. Yeah.
They give to a building and they'll give to other things, but not so much to missions.
Well, so, you know, one of the best examples of this is my friend Phil Christopher, who recently retired from First Baptist Abilene. Lily has the side of this church. The last two capital campaigns they had at that church were half to building projects and half to mission projects. You gave to the capital campaign and you gave to a mission endowment as well. And they've done tremendous things there with that. It's a beautiful model of doing two things together. And I'm way out of time. All right. Let's pray. Charlene's coming. All right. God, grant us your grace to be your peace in the world, and help us to know how we can serve those around us who you put in our path. We pray through Jesus Christ. Amen.